we have a new World Chess Champion. That is a new Fischer random World Chess Champion. I'm going to bring you up to date with events in Oslo and the final between Magnus Carlsen and Wesley So. Now, after 2 days, Wesley So was leading by a large margin. Carlsen really had to work hard to catch up. On day 3, they drew the first game, and now we're going to take a look at what happened in the next game. By this stage, they're playing 10-minute games, so pretty fast time limit. For those of you that aren't familiar with Fischer Random, then basically the baseline pieces are shuffled. So here you can see that, we have a very original starting position. Only the rook standing here is actually on its starting square. Wesley started with pawn here, which looks pretty sensible as it opens up the bishop's diagonal, attacking that pawn. And at the same time, that pawn controls one of the centre squares. I think we've seen already in these Fischer random games that actually the centre is still very important. I remember someone saying to me, yeah, but which centre? It's a very interesting way of putting it. But we saw Magnus flouting the rules in the previous video and really suffered for it. So knight b6 by the world champion, blocking the attack to the pawn on a7, but also bringing out the knight. Again, there's more tension here. Do you solve the problem of the knights on the back ranks, or do you solve the problem of the bishops first and how they're going to develop? And what about the centre? Do you occupy the centre with your pawns? If you are going to do that, do you bring your knights out first? It's complicated. Wesley also brought the knight out, and now Magnus plonked a pawn in the middle of the board. Fair enough. And Wesley decided to break straight away in the centre. So Magnus exchanged. Now that brings Wesley's queen out at a very early stage. At this moment, compared to normal classical chess, it's actually not possible to attack the queen with a knight. You'll notice these two aren't well placed to do that. So I think Wesley gets away with this basically in this position. But Magnus brings out this knight and perhaps prepares to attack the queen. Knight out from Wesley, which, I don't know, it's hard to say whether this is a good move or a bad move, and it does block that bishop on g1. Magnus played c6, which seems reasonable to control this square, but also real reason to bring out that bishop potentially on c7. And now bishop f2 from Wesley, which perhaps prepares to bring the rook into the game, maybe even prepares Carlsen kingside. And now here, well, pawn to g6 looks reasonable, pawn to f6 also looks reasonable. Magnus played bishop c7, which also seems like a very sensible move. However, he had overlooked that the simple knight f5 forks both these pawns. Incredible. When you get an odd placement of pieces, then strange tactics occur, and at such an early stage of the game, this is very, very unusual. So a blunder already from Magnus Carlsen. So he played pawn to e6 to prevent the knight takes pawn check, but gave up the pawn on g7. So already an opening disaster for Magnus Carlsen. Here actually the best move is to play bishop to d4, protecting the knight on g7. And he can get quite tactical after e5, but basically white is a lot better there. But Wesley played a natural move, knight to h5. You know, when you've only got 10 minutes, you play simply. You know, there's no point in wasting time calculating. Magnus played h6, which prepares to bring the bishop out here. And, well, he does have some compensation for the pawn. You know, his pieces are very active. You know, this bishop on this diagonal and the rook here. And the queen is slightly oddly placed. But Wesley took no chances here, and he simply played his bishop to d3. And here Magnus's next move was a little bit odd. He could just exchange bishops here. Now, I can't imagine that Wesley would damage his structure like this, because that means that this knight can sit very happily at some point on d5 without any fear of being driven away by a pawn. And just black has nice compensation. I'm sure that Wesley would have played queen takes bishop, giving back the pawn on g2. But this is a safe position for white. Okay, that's queenside castling there. So the rooks are joined. White is very safe here. Remember, Wesley was so far ahead that draws were acceptable to him. Magnus had to keep pressing for a win. And here, well, we're getting close to a normal chess position where it looks about equal. But certainly white doesn't have any difficulties there at all. So let's come back to the game. So bishop d3 has just been played, a safe move from Wesley. Magnus played bishop g6, and this is strange. Bishop takes bishop played. Now rook takes isn't going to help black much. Pawn takes. So Magnus gets back his pawn. But in this position, actually white is doing pretty well, and it's all to do with the pawn structure. You'll notice that white's pawns are absolutely perfect. They haven't moved, there are no weaknesses, whereas black's, well, an isolated pawn on e6, not great. In itself, it's potentially a weakness, but it also means that that square in front here, e4, is available for white's pieces. Those pawns also on g6 and h6 also don't look very pleasant. Also, black has yet to castle. You know, this rook has still to come into the game. And here Wesley can castle on either side of the board. Castle's queenside is possible. There we go. When you castle long in Fischer random, you still end up in the same normal position. But he chose to castle kingside. Okay, watch this, folks. There you go. I'm not going to call it castling short because that was a very long king switch. Let's do an action replay. Let's just go back. So the king started on c1, but it's going to end up on the normal kingside castling position or short castling position. Let's just see it again. And this is definitely the strongest way to bring the king to safety, because the rook comes into play on the f file, and that creates immediate difficulties for black. Threat, bishop takes knight, followed by queen takes bishop, winning a piece. So Carlsen played g5, but remember, he's yet to castle. That king is and rook are oddly placed, but Wesley can take the initiative. Simply bringing the rook in to the middle is nice, but knight e2 puts immediate pressure on that bishop. So, well, the normal move here for Carlsen would be to simply retreat that bishop. But in this case, Wesley has a very, very easy game. He could simply exchange and play bishop g3. He's got a superior pawn structure. His pieces are very nicely placed. This knight is about to enter the game. It's just a better position for white without any real complications. Instead, Carlsen played e5 to support the bishop, but now, well, this bishop is now trapped. If g4, that doesn't actually help matters, because in this position, you'll notice the rook is on the same file as the queen, and that discovered attack is simply winning for white. So here, after g3, Magnus castled in the hope that he could drum up some kind of kingside attack with those pawns and white's slightly exposed king, but it was a pretty forlorn hope, basically because Wesley's pieces are so well coordinated. Also, Magnus's king itself isn't that well protected, with that pawn advanced, leaves the king a little bit airy. So the queen attacks the knight, queen d6, knight d4. Now white moving into action, opening up the file for the rook. And g4, well, too little, too late. Knight f5 hits the queen as well as the knight. Magnus gave a check. The king crept into the corner. The queen is attacked. It retreated to d7, and now knight e7 check. Forks, king and rook. Wesley took the rook. Magnus took a rook, but remember that Wesley is still a piece up in this position. It is completely winning for white. Attacks the queen, which moved to the side, and now rook takes f4 was the final move of the game. Magnus Carlsen resigned, and with it, Wesley So won the title. So let's just clear up exactly why Magnus resigned here. First of all, threat is rook a4 checkmate. So if b5, well, of course, it's possible just to come back and take the knight, but here we can be a bit more spectacular, and let's do that. So the queen comes in, takes the rook, and knight c5 prepares for the final attack. That combination of queen and knights is just too much for black to bear. Let's try queen c4, at least threatening a mate in one. Then check. We can do it all with checks now. And the knights waltz in, followed by the queen, and that's checkmate. There we go. So Wesley So becomes the first official Fischer Random World Champion. The event has been recognised by FIDE, so congratulations to him, and very well deserved on his part. I mean, he completely outplayed Magnus, who looked very much out of sorts. He was very angry, and, well, in the end, an angry man will only defeat himself. He couldn't channel that aggression into the games, and yeah, played in these last games, I have to say, Magnus was unrecognisable from his normal form. So there we go. I've really enjoyed this Fischer Random event. I hope that it continues. I'm not sure about an annual event, but certainly perhaps every 2 years. I don't want it to take over from classical chess, but I think it's a very nice addition to the events at the elite level. I hope you enjoyed it too. Don't forget to like, comment, share and subscribe. And if you want to support us, then do check out the links to Patreon and PayPal in the links up there or even down there. Thanks a lot.